Welcome to the Odd Life Podcast. That's AWED, which stands for Awake, Well, and Empowered. We're here to have conversations to inspire women of all ages to live odd AF. So thank you for joining me. Let's dig in. Hello, everyone. Welcome to season 3 of the Odd Life Podcast. I'm your host, Hallie. Thank you so much for being here. I've missed you all. I have missed being on here. It's been a crazy summer, and I have finally now taken a deep breath and able to get back to the thing that I've been looking forward to for so long. But it just needed to wait a little bit until I had a little breathing room, a little quiet in the house. I had kids at home. And so it made it almost impossible to try and record and do anything. Even my brain was out for the summer. Like, you know how when you get to summertime, you're like, I've checked out. I can't even function right now. So that's kind of where I was at. The brain wasn't churning out the content. I had no idea what to talk about. And so I just put it on hold until I finally figured out what I wanted to say. And so now we're back. School's back in session for probably most people at this time. And we're ready to crank out some more episodes for you all. I just want to say thank you. I want to say thank you really quick to anybody who's reached out to me via DMs, a message, or text, a conversation, or even via my husband. God love the man. He is always telling people about my podcast. He is my best marketing tool for sure. And I just want to tell you, thank you for listening. Thank you for the feedback. Thank you for sharing what resonated with you, what you're liking, and what is keeping you coming back, because I know that there's a million other things you could be doing rather than listening to this podcast. But hopefully, if you find the content entertaining or somewhat helpful, or just like you're listening to a friend, hanging out with her on the patio with a cup of coffee or an iced matcha, whatever that feels like for you, I am just so grateful that you're hanging out with me. So just a quick thank you to everybody who's been tuning into all the past episodes. And I am so excited for season 3. We're going to talk about that here in a little bit of what's coming up, what we're going to be doing. But I wanted to share a little life update, and we'll share more about the podcast here in a second. But in relation to the podcast, it's really hard in the summertime for me to record because in the past, I have had family around, kids. We're traveling for various things, whether it's my husband's work or the kids' baseball or going to see my daughter up in Omaha. There's a lot of things that are happening in the summertime for us. And that is about to come to an end, or that it already has come to an end, because now, I'm officially an empty nester or a bird launcher or an open nester, whatever you want to call it. We are a kid-free house. I still have 2 dogs, so I still feel like I've got toddlers around that are just always napping. It's a little bit different now in the house that I am able to have the freedom to do stuff. But all summer, it's been kind of crazy. And this is what we had going on this last summer. So we had the end of baseball season for my middle son, going out there to see him finish up his junior year in college. And then my youngest graduated high school. So there's all the senior stuff you have to go to. And then the last celebrations and the grad parties and the graduation itself, all the kids were able to come back for his graduation. And being the last one, the poor kid, you know how that goes with the last child. It's kind of like, oh yeah, the last kid, they're kind of on their own, doing their own thing a lot of times. And they get a bit brushed to the side because there's so much other stuff going on. And this was his time in the spotlight. So it was great to have everybody around to be able to celebrate him. Our graduation's on the football field. So watching him come down the stream of kids towards their seats and picking him out. Thank God he's tall. I could see what he had on and I can pick him out because he's usually a head taller than most kids. And this is the last time I'm going to see this happening. The last time I'm going to see a child walking down to go through this process. And this wasn't just a final thing for him. This was a final thing for my husband and I. This was our last child. We no longer have to deal with the wake up calls in the morning. I should say get to. We no longer get to go to his events at school. We no longer get to cheer him on from the stands in high school. We are no longer having to try and figure out what we're going to feed this child, where he's at, staying up late to wait for him to get home. That's all done. And while, yes, there's a moment to be sad about that, there's also a big sigh of relief, like, whew, he made it. We did it. We did this together, kids. We got him through and he is done. So that part was May for us, and it was chaos. And then shortly after that, my husband had a work trip down to Key West, and we took our daughter with us. She's older now. She's in the workforce, and she had a little dead time in her job. And so she was able to get away. And I'd never been to Key West before, and I had no idea what really to expect. But I did know that Ernest Hemingway was a famous resident there. So you heard a lot about Duval Street and all the places he visited and hung out. And so I wanted to make sure I saw where he lived, and we did. We had an event there one night. Unfortunately, it rained buckets, so our event had to get moved back to the hotel, but we were able to see the residence on the outside. They had the inside closed, but we were still able to see his office, his writing space that he had above his carriage house. Downtown's fun. I shouldn't say downtown, it's the town. There's literally probably a mile wide. We walked home from downtown before to our hotel. So the main area is a lot of open air bars and restaurants and music venues. And I say music venue, I say that really lightly. It's a bar that has a stage, and you never know what you're going to hear. It may be a cover band that is atrocious, or maybe a bluesy rock band that is amazing. We heard it all. One of the fun ways to see the city actually was through a scavenger hunt that we did. The company organized it. So we all got in groups of 4, I think 4 to 6 people. And we had a list of clues. We had to go to certain places in the island, had to try and figure it out through the clues where we're supposed to go and take pictures of that spot and then submit it in a text. And then we had to go to one area to stuff backpacks that all went to charity for kids in the area. And it was a fun way to see the island. So we got a chance to bop around and see all different parts. It's very small, so we can get around pretty easily. You can see it all pretty quickly. We did actually take a boat out the first day we got there to a sandbar to be on the water before all the activity started. We got a chance to enjoy the beautiful weather. It was a little windy, so we didn't get the crystal blue waters like normal, but it was still fun. I think the best place to enjoy Key West is probably getting on a boat and bopping around to different islands and to different sandbars and maybe fishing a little bit, snorkeling. The water there is incredible. I did share some video and some pictures on Instagram when I was traveling down there, and the water looked stunning coming in. And then we had a couple days of some wind, and so it made it a little choppy, so we didn't see the crystal blue most of the time, but it still was amazing. It was hot, and thank God for the breeze. Felt amazing. We had some great meals. There's a place called Moondog Cafe that was fantastic. So just a really great little visit. And then we came back and went to the College World Series. If you don't know, the College World Series is in Omaha. I should say the Men's College World Series for baseball. And my daughter's company that she works for a sports broadcasting digital media company. And her company partners with D1 Baseball. That's an organization. They cover all things D1 baseball, and they get a chance to interview players, make a lot of content about the College World Series. And it was so fun to see her do her thing, but also go to the first game of the series. We saw the Florida State-Tennessee game. It was fantastic. It was a come from behind win. Amazing, just as baseball should be, that kind of game. And Tennessee ended up going on and winning the whole thing at the very end. But it was cool to see the environment. If you've never been to Omaha, the best time to go, honestly, I think, is during the College World Series. There's all kinds of people. There's a lot going on. The vibe is just so fun. I love college sports because everyone's so passionate about what they're doing. And these are young kids. These are kids that are 18 to 22, 23, depending on the fifth year situation or COVID years these days. But there's kids that are young adults. They are working so hard to achieve a huge goal. And it's really cool. And it's also very heartbreaking because someone's always got to lose. And when you watch those kids' faces crumble at the very end, the last out, and they're not the one that's got the W next to their name, it is so hard to watch. And being a mother of boys that play baseball, I can almost feel that pain. And then after that, my daughter and I snuck away down to Florida, the panhandle of Florida. There's an area called 30A. It is basically a strip of road between Panama City and Destin. And it's got all these little beach communities in there. So her and I took a little mom-daughter trip away, which was so great. We did it back in 2020. Obviously, things were a little different then, and it was pretty quiet in the summer. Well, normally it's pretty crazy. And there were parts of the area that were busier than others. Like Seaside was very busy still. Our area was a little more quiet, but we got a taste of it then and hadn't had a chance to go back until this last summer. So we finally got a chance to go down and did our little mom-daughter trip. We got a little condo on the beach. It was fantastic. It was between Alice Beach and I think Seagrove is where we were at. And it was so fun. So every morning we'd get up and take our rented bikes down to these different little communities, get a cup of coffee, ride around and take pictures of these beautiful homes. And it feels like a little magical village. It's just so fun to have all these cute houses so close together, these little cobblestone streets, and looking at all the different architecture. It's stunning. Once in a while we'd grab a little breakfast someplace, but most of the time we had our breakfast in our condo. We just had some like Greek yogurt and berries or some granola and got down to the beach, read our books, got in the water, enjoyed just the breeze. Oh, the weather was perfect. The water was crystal clear, crystal clear. And then at lunch, we would always have some type of chicken salad with some chips and crackers or some cut up veggies. And then our big splurge was the evening. We would go out to dinner, usually her and I. And one night we did actually grab a pizza and go down to the beach. And we sat there and watched the sunset, ate our pizza. It was gorgeous. And a couple nights we did walk the beach late and when it was darker. And you see all these little kids out with headlamps on and chasing what they called ghost crabs. Never saw them, really didn't want to see them. I don't really want to know what's under the sand there. So we would just enjoy being out there. It was so perfect. The weather was amazing because we could walk down there with like shorts and a tank top and be completely fine, not cold at all. And we just had the best time together. We drove down in two parts. We drove down to Nashville the first night, stayed the night, went to Bar Taco down on 12 South. The next morning got up and had our proper bagel. If you know what I'm talking about, it's over by Belmont University, which is a stunning place to go visit as well. It's got the best architecture, gorgeous manicured grounds, flowers, and then got on the road and headed down to 30A. But on the way back, we drove all the way home. About a 15-hour drive home for us to Kansas City from 30A. You got your daughter with you. You're talking about all the things. She's doing a little bit of work. I'm listening to a book. Then we turn the radio on and we listen to some of our favorite music. And we sang and laugh and all the things mom daughters do. So we had a great time. So there was that. And then we came home to watch the boys play baseball. And all summer long as well, we were watching the boys play baseball. They had a league that is for college players as well as post-high school kids getting ready to go into college to play. And they have a local league here in Kansas City. So we'd go up every Monday, Wednesday night. They had double headers. We'd go watch the boys play. So we were kept quite busy this summer. And the boys were in and out. My daughter came home quite a bit. And so we had a lot going on. It's hard to find time to get this done. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to enjoy the summer. I'm not going to put pressure on myself to produce episodes. I will get there when I get there. I wanted to enjoy and savor the time with all the kids around, with my youngest living in the house for the last time. He will probably come home this next summer, maybe, depending on if they choose to send him someplace for the summer to play. But that's what I did all summer. Our oldest son, his name is Kyson, Kysen. I don't know if I've ever said my kids' names. I don't know why. I just haven't. My son Kyson is going to be a senior in college, and my youngest, who's my 18-year-old, his name is Dax. They're going to be playing baseball at the same school. So they left a week early before classes actually started to go out there. They were going to do some training together, just get themselves acclimated to the elevation a little bit. It's not super high, but it's enough that makes a difference. It takes a toll on your cardiovascular and your lungs. So they wanted to get out there and do some work before classes started. And when he left, we were a mess. He said goodbye to the neighbor kids that were super close to him. He was like an older brother to their oldest. And oof, that was rough. That was a rough goodbye too. But we were also heading out there about 4 days to go move him into his dorm. So it wasn't like, see you in 6 months, kiddo. It was going to be 4 days. But having your child drive away with all of his stuff to go to college, it's hard. It's a moment that you'll never forget. Before all this happened, though, I told my husband, what if we did a little trip after we go move him in? So we're not turning back around and coming right back to an empty house. That's going to really feel final. I think the drive out there feels exciting, right? You're going to help him move in and all this stuff. And it's to drive home where everything kind of feels empty. And you know you're heading back to an empty house. It feels weird. So we decided to take a little trip around Colorado. I hadn't been to Southwest Colorado in a long time, since I was 10 years old. My husband's never been. So we decided we're going to do a little detour before we come all the way home. So that's what we did. So we moved him in. We're there from Thursday, Friday, Saturday. We golfed with them Sunday morning. I didn't golf, they did. I drove the cart. And then we took off Sunday evening, and it was much better. That goodbye. He had a meeting Sunday night. All of the new freshmen or new students that were coming into the school had to go to required meetings. So he had to get back for that. So he was in a rush. So he didn't really have time to be upset about us leaving. And we already had done that the week before at home. So it was a much easier goodbye than I expected. A lot easier than saying goodbye to our daughter and our other son. So we ended up taking off Sunday night, getting to Salida. And then from Salida the next day, we went down to Pagosa Springs. And then from Pagosa Springs over to Durango, up through Silverton. And then once we hit Silverton, there's an area called the $1 Million Highway. It goes to Ouray. It's gorgeous. And then from Ouray, we went up and around to Crested Butte and then back to Denver. We ended up staying a little longer than we expected. But I don't know how we could have done this trip any shorter, because initially we were thinking Wednesday to come back home. There's no way we would have seen everything we could have in 4 days. Not a chance. All we've been doing was driving. That's it. We ended up staying in Ouray 2 nights. We were hoping to hike there, but it ended up raining a second day. So that took hiking off the activity list. But we did see Box Canyon Falls, which is right outside town, or right actually in town. While this was a trip to explore the Southwest, we weren't going to have a ton of time to do all the things in each place, but it gave us a chance to get a feel for the different areas and different cities and towns. So now we know what we want to go back to and spend more time. And Ouray is one of them for sure. We want to go back to Crested Butte for sure. We came in through Kebler Pass because there's a bridge that has been out. And so it's really hard to get through there. They only have it open at certain times of the day, and it's one lane and it's kind of chaotic. So we went up and around this different way, the north part into Crested Butte. It's called Kebler Pass. I saw the most beautiful aspen trees. It was the biggest, I think, aspen grove I've ever seen. And I can only imagine what that's going to look like in about 4 weeks. It's going to be stunning. We may try and sneak back over there. I don't know. We'll see. But we finished in Denver. We ended up going through and staying enough time that we finished in Denver on Saturday. Boys came up and met us, and we went to Red Rocks Amphitheater. And my husband has never been to Red Rocks. I haven't been since college. I went and saw Big Head Todd. So he got a chance to see a concert. We saw Revolution. Revolution is this California reggae band that we all love. We've been listening to them for a number of years. Whenever we go skiing, it's always music we put on. We go to Colorado to drive. We all love it as a family. So the boys came up, and my son's girlfriend came with them, and we all went to the concert that night. I was very, very present. Remember all the songs, all that stuff, things I used to not have memories of back in the day. But man, it's a great place people watch. That's for sure. So that's how we finished it. And then we stayed the night, Saturday night in Denver, and then came home Sunday. And it was a much easier drive home. We laughed. We got to eastern Colorado and western Kansas. We're like, oh, honey, look at those train tracks. Look at those windmills. Look at all those cows. How beautiful. Because all we did driving through Colorado was like, oh my gosh, this is stunning. Oh my gosh, look at that mountain. Oh my gosh, look at these trees. And we get to western Kansas, and we're like, oh, wow, look at that. Look at that train track. How stunning is that? We kind of making a joke about it. Not to knock on Kansas. I've lived here for 20 some years. So this has been my home longer than I lived in Nebraska, where I grew up. Colorado is a sight to behold for sure. And it's so crazy how so much of the state can look so different. They definitely have their eastern Colorado is very much like farmland, and there's tumbleweeds going by. And then you hit the mountain range, and there's all different kinds of mountains. It's the craggy rocks, it's the red rocks, it's plateau, tons of trees, no trees, lots of aspens, a lot of evergreens. And the western gets to be more of a deserty feel, a little more Utah, Arizona feel. So it has a little bit of everything. It's kind of nuts. So that was our summer. And I've been reflecting on being this empty nester now. And while I know a lot of people are in the same boat, and if you're in the same situation right now, you've got all the kids are gone, or maybe you're in a point where the kids are all in school and now you're home and you've got some free time. It's okay to be sad about that. And I am sad about not having them around. It sucks because I love hanging out with my kids. They're a lot of fun. We laugh a ton. Sure, we all bicker at each other like normal families do, but I am also relishing the idea of not having to be someplace that wasn't something that I chose to do. There's not a school activity. There's not a game right now. There's not any type of required effort on my end to take care of somebody else except for myself, my dogs, and partially my husband. It is just me, myself, and I during the day. And it is fabulous. It's a weird feeling. There's this sadness, but then also this feeling of freedom and, oh my gosh, I'm back to who I am. Even though I am changed, of course. Once you're a mom, once you're a parent, you'll never be the same person that you were before having kids. But you start to feel more of who you're supposed to be. I get to rediscover parts of myself. I got this podcast going a couple of years ago. That was a big step to doing that. But now I get to dive in headfirst and really immerse myself in this time of my life where I get to be just me and be more of who I am and discover new things about myself, find new friends, new travels, even the relationship with my husband. I get to explore that again in a whole new way. Because for so long, we are in this parent mode and you do this and I got to do this and then I take care of this for him and then you got to take him to this thing and you're coaching and I'm making the snacks, whatever. There's always a role to play when you're a parent. You're never not on. And when you're not on, even you are, when you're sleeping, you're still on as a parent. A kid gets sick, middle of the night, you're waiting for one to come home from someplace. They're traveling with friends and you're making sure they get to where they're supposed to go safely. There's always some sort of responsibility. And while I am always going to be a parent, I'm not actively parenting, as my friend Jennifer says. And that is sort of a great feeling because the mental load of actively parenting is so much of our lives. I've been a parent for 25 years as of this week. I was 27 when I had my first child, so almost as long as who I was before having kids. So this is a crazy feeling to be finally at a point where it's just me. I don't have to worry about me. I will worry about them for sure, but like on a daily basis, what's happening in my life is what I choose to make happen or not make happen. That's a pretty cool feeling. So if you're in the same situation, I feel you, I hear you. You are not alone. And I think though, it's going to be such an amazing time for all of us that we get to rediscover ourselves. And for a while there, I chastised myself about not doing this earlier, even with kids, like finding out who I really am, even though I'm a mom, even though I'm actively parenting, I can still do things that I want to do as a mom. And I had a hard time finding those things. I mean, I had my writing, I was blogging, I started the podcast. Those were really important things for me to do. But also travel, retreats, women's groups, curating more friends, more activities, more adventures. A lot of times those things were dictated by my kids' schedules, my husband's schedule. And I didn't always put that first, which it's hard to. It's hard to mentally wrap my brain around trying to do something just for myself when I have all these other things that are relying on me to help get them done around the house and the kids and getting them from point A to point B. And it's a lot that pulls you in different directions. I think it's really hard to even gather that mental space and the energy sometimes when you're actively parenting and then trying to find time for yourself. It's really hard. So, you know what? I'm not going to feel guilty about it or shame myself for not doing it more. But at the same time, I've thought a lot about it over the years. So now here's my time. This is the time. Let's go. So I can't wait to see what happens for all of us. That the kids have left the nest and we are on our own and now back to some freedom that we haven't had in a very long time. And the last thing I'll say about this, I did share an Instagram post about this when my son left, about how that first week he was gone and my other son was gone, that the silence was deafening. And it is at first, it's a shock to the system. There's no slamming doors, no boys yelling at each other, no one's yelling at their game. They're playing up in the room. They're not running around with the dogs in the house. It's just different. And while at first it feels weird, I'm learning now to really embrace it And it feels pretty darn good to have this silence, that it feels peaceful. And I'm not going to be mad about that at all. On the flip side of that, though, I catch myself talking out loud to myself, to the dogs. I've always done that a little bit. I'll even put my audiobook on speaker so I can hear something in the house. It's an interesting place to be, but we're going to embrace this whole stage of life with open arms and some energy and some sense of adventure. And I hope you'll do the same. I'm looking forward to hearing your guys' stories about what you're doing. And speaking of that, I want to talk about the podcast and what's coming up. I did get a little disheartened at the end of this last season. I had a couple guests on that I was so excited to have on. They had big followings. I think for them to say yes to me, I felt like, oh my gosh, I felt honored and humbled that they'd said yes to be on the podcast. And then when it came to when I shared it and I was letting people know it's out there, they did not share on their platforms. And it was just a really hard, but also a necessary thing to hear, or not hear, I guess I should say, is, maybe it wasn't the best interview. Maybe they weren't proud of it. Maybe they didn't really like it. Even though the feedback I got was, oh, that was a great conversation. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. Let me know when it's published. I'll make sure to share. And then nothing. So I was disheartened by that a little bit because I felt like, one, they didn't follow through on their end of things. But then I also realized it was an opportunity for me to learn something. Okay. Let's just say hypothetically, they weren't proud of it. They didn't love the conversation. They didn't like the questions I asked. They didn't like the answers they gave. They didn't like the way they looked in the camera. I don't know. So what can I do differently to make it a better podcast? So I sat down and started to reevaluate some things on my own. And I noticed one thing that I was doing in the interview. When I do all the editing myself, so when I do the edits, I would take out all my obviously those kinds of things, all my own filler words for sure. But also when that person was talking, I would mute my own audio. Not during the interview, but in the edits, I would mute all the, oh yeah, sure, like all these agreeing type of noises I would make. I would say stuff in response to people. And it's just them talking then in the audio. And the reason why I did that edit in those interviews is I didn't want it to be distracting. Because oftentimes when I listen to a podcast, people talk over each other. And there's this cutting people off, interruption, and too many voices going on at the same time. It can be distracting or sometimes annoying. And I don't want that to be what people thought about my podcast. To hear my voice and like this constant, yep. So rather than keep a couple, I took them all out. And maybe that didn't seem like a normal conversation. It's just a person talking forever. And then here I came back with a question and then them talking, and there was no banter back and forth. And so I know that might not be a deal breaker for people, but I just thought, well, maybe it needs to be more like a real conversation where you hear people, yes, agreeing and acknowledging or laughing alongside the person when they make a comment, all those things. And then also what I was doing was I put together an outline of the questions I had or topics I wanted to cover. And I always would send them to them ahead of time so they knew roughly what we're going to talk about. And of course, it always related to living awake, well, and empowered, sharing their story a little bit, how they got to where they're at or what they're doing now, whatever the inspiration is for what they're doing in their life. And I would give them an outline. And I had the outline always printed out and ready for me to look at to get back on track in case we got distracted. And I think sometimes what would happen is that I would be too close to the script or too close to that outline that I didn't let some things flow the way they should. And I know I'm a natural conversationalist. I can easily go with the flow of the conversation. And if I just use my instincts, my curiosity about that person in the context of awake, well, and empowered, it's not hard to figure out. I can ask the questions on the fly. And so I feel like sometimes I became more robotic in the way I ask questions because of that outline. And I want to make sure we got back on track. So I'm taking that out. I want to have an idea of what I want to cover with them, like maybe some big bullet points, but not at all having the script or not at all having these typed out questions because I don't want it to be so guided. I want it to flow naturally because a lot of conversations I love listening to are the ones that just follow the stream of things. Of course, I want to make sure it's relevant to living awake, well, and empowered so that it gives you something to take away from the conversation and inspire you to live more awake, well, and empowered, but I don't want it to be super rigid. And maybe I've been that way, maybe I haven't, I don't know. But I feel like that outline and those questions maybe are not allowing it to be flow as naturally as it could be. And I also want to have a lot more fun on the podcast. I want to laugh more. I want to be able to show up here in a space where I can make fun of myself, joke. I tend to be self-deprecating. It's a talent of mine. Grew up doing it. You really can't hurt me any more than I've already done myself. But that's just my style of humor. I'm pretty sarcastic. I used to be pretty cynical. I tried to nix that the last 5-10 years. But I like a good laugh. I like laughing. I hate my laugh, but I'll still do it. I don't like the way I look when I laugh. There's a lot of things I hate about the way I laugh, but I still love to do it. The second part of having guests on, besides me learning how to do this better and become a better interviewer and conversationalist with guests on, is to also work really hard on cultivating the right kind of guests on here. And the flip side of that, though, it's really hard to get a guest to say yes. It may be their time frame. It may be they're swamped already with a lot of podcast interviews. If, let's say an author has a book coming out, they're going to be on this book tour. They're going to be on a podcast tour as well. And it's hard to get people to say yes, especially to a podcast that's fairly new. Doesn't have a ton of listeners yet. So we're trying to get quality people on the podcast that will be worth a listen, but it requires a yes from their side of things. And that's always a huge hurdle. So with that said, I'm going to be adding more solo conversations on here. And actually, I get a lot of great feedback on the solo conversations too. And so with that, I have added a link to a form on Google. That is an anonymous form, does not require a name or an email address, any contact information whatsoever. It asks for your feedback. What are some things you're loving? What can we do differently? What are some topics you want to hear about? What other podcasts do you like listening to? This gives me an idea of who my audience is and what you care about and what you're feeling about this podcast. So I hope if you could do that for me when you're done listening, that'd be so helpful. I appreciate it so much. The next thing of the podcast is the YouTube. I still have the YouTube channel that shares all of the episodes on there as well. It's just time consuming. And what I've always done is done the audio release and the video release at the same time. And I think what I'm going to do is release the audio first and then maybe a week or two later, release the video, just because it takes a lot of time and I want to do it right. I like things being pretty and I like them to be succinct and I like them to be aesthetically pleasing. So I'll make sure it looks a certain way before I throw it up there. And I also like to add pictures. So when I talk about something like, for example, in this conversation, I'm going to probably show some of my pictures from the Key West trip and from my Colorado trip, and I'll put them on the screen in a little bubble next to me talking, or I'll just put it all over the whole screen and give you an idea of what I was talking about. So I like the video for that aspect, that I can give you a little bit more, but it takes more time because it's just me editing. So I think I'm going to delay the video release just because it's easier on me. It's a lot to do. We'll see how that goes. Maybe I'll batch record these podcasts, the audio version, and schedule them. And then I can go and spend more time editing the actual videos and then get them scheduled as well. So I don't know. We'll see how this all works. Anywho, that's that. And the last thing about the podcast is I've always wanted this. I've always wanted to create a community within this. One of my biggest objectives with this podcast is bring women together that are also seeking to live an awake, well, and empowered life. I want you to know that you're not alone. And this is a way for us to really feel that. You know, you listen to the podcast and you can go, yep, I understand that. She's going through that too. But just me and you. But there's lots of other women out there that are feeling the same way, or maybe pursuing this life as well. And so why not do this together? So I have had a Patreon page for a long time. I've had it since the very beginning. What Patreon is a way to support an artist, a creator, through just a donation to support the podcast. I found out about this years ago when I was listening to Rich Roll's podcast. He mentioned his Patreon page, and so I checked it out. I thought, okay, maybe this is a way that I can get support and not have ads on my podcast. I just really don't love the constant ads. You'll look at the 30-minute podcast. There are 3 or 4 different products that the podcast host then talks about. And I get that. People have to get paid. If you're going to be a full-time podcaster, you've got this big team and it's a big production, you've got to get paid somehow. And I'm Not going to knock that whatsoever, but I don't always love listening to podcasts with all the ads. So I always fast forward. So I know that maybe is how you feel as well. I just don't love having that break in the flow of things. So I've always had the Patreon page up. You got different things based on what tier you decided to join. It's never really taken off. And it's a lot of work. It's a lot for me to keep track. So I thought, okay, what if we take this back to creating a community? And the reason why I'm looking at doing it on Patreon versus something else like Facebook, a Facebook group, I just truly don't love Facebook. I don't want to be on there. Back in the day when it first came up, it was easy to navigate. It was just your feed, friend requests, and a couple of groups here and there that you would join. That's it. Now there's so much out there, and my feed is now full of other things besides the people I follow. It's chaos. And I don't want to be on there. I really don't. I love Instagram. I'm hopping on Threads now more than I have ever before. And that's going to become my new Twitter. Twitter, I think, is a dumpster fire. So I'm really trying to phase out of that. I am trying to really focus my attention on trying to cultivate a space where you want to come as well without all the other noise. And I want this Patreon space to be a place to come for community. So we're going to have two different types of membership. One just basic, where it is behind the scenes conversation. You can join in, like there's a welcome chat and go in there and introduce yourself, meet other people that are new. And then we'll have other topics that will be things we can talk about, whether it's regarding the podcast we just released or things that are going on in the world or women's issues, whatever we're going through. You can bring up a topic as well. It's just a place to connect with other women that are also wanting to live awake while empowered, that are also interested in this podcast, that also are feeling the same way, or also going the same direction as you. I think the biggest part of this process for me of really discovering myself and becoming more awake while empowered is it's awful lonely sometimes. We get caught up in our day-to-day lives and the conversations that we have with our neighbors or with our people we see at the gym all the time, or the people that you've always known since your kids were little, are just different. It may be more superficial conversation. Like, I want to go where I feel connected on a really deep level with people because of shared experiences, shared feelings, shared goals. And when you pursue yourself, a lot of times it's a really lonely road. So this is a space I hope for you that you can come and feel part of a group, part of a community, a group of friends that are here for you. We have basic, and then I've got a VIP level of membership where it's going to be all the other things that the basic gets, but we're going to have live chats every month and also a book club. So the basic is like a latte, and then that VIP is a really fancy latte. I'm not here to make a gazillion dollars. I do feel like it's important to have a paywall. Otherwise, we're going to have people to just lurk, just sit and just watch the conversation. I think it's what some people do in Facebook groups easily, and they don't partake. They just sit and lurk and listen and watch and don't engage. And we're not here for that. We're here to engage and find our people. And if there's a paywall, you have some skin in the game. You are here to invest in this conversation. You've invested in this space, and now you want to be part of the conversation. That's the goal here. If you just want to lurk and listen to other people have conversations, then that's what all that other stuff is for. But I really want people that are going to engage and really partake in building this community. So that's what's different about the podcast. We're going to change the way Patreon's set up. I'll have the link in the show notes as well. And I hope that you find it of value. What it ends up being more of is because of what you put into it. A lot of times I've done workshops before where there was a Facebook group and it requires us to participate. We'd have a week of content that we'd go through, and then it's encouraged to talk about it, like what we're experiencing, what we're going through, the lessons we're learning, all of that. And so when you hear a podcast episode, I would love for you to come in there and say, oh my gosh, I went through this thing, so I feel the same way, or I went through this and this is my experience. Who else has gone through this? And asking questions and meeting people and just engaging. I don't want this to keep being a one-way conversation. I think the podcast is just the tip of the iceberg as far as the conversation that we can keep having about a topic or about living awake, well, and empowered. There's so much more to talk about, but it requires multiple people to keep it going. So that is my hope, that you'll join me over in the community. I really want you just to find other women that are living this shared value system that you have, that are wanting to go the same direction you are. I think it's important to find your people. And if you care about these things we're talking about in this podcast, then hopefully you're going to find those same women in the community. Cool? So with that said, welcome back to another season of the podcast. I just wanted to give you an update of what I've been doing during this break and the goals for the podcast, what's coming up, and asking for your feedback and just letting you know about the community as well. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks for coming back to another season of the podcast, and we'll see you all next week. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you found this episode either helpful, inspiring, entertaining, or just made you feel less alone, or maybe all of those things. If so, I'd love it if you'd share this episode with a friend, as well as on your social media. And if I dare ask for more, to rate and review the podcast on your favorite platform, especially Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You see, the more reviews we have, the more people we can reach, and the bigger the Odd Life community can become. You guys are the best. I can't wait to chat again next week, so we'll see you then.